I was halfway through stacking firewood behind my cabin when I heard the unmistakable sound of tires crunching gravel. Not many people came up this far without a reason. I wiped my hands on my jeans and walked around the side of my place, only to find a pearl-white SUV parked at the edge of my lot. And stepping out, wearing designer sunglasses and a blazer way too formal for the woods, was the queen of the HOA herself, Cheryl Whitmore, Mr. Maddox Barnes. She called out like she was summoning a waiter. "We need to talk, now." I leaned against the porch railing and nodded. "You found me." "What's the occasion, Cheryl?" Cheryl was president of the Silver Pines Homeowners Association, a self-appointed tyrant ruling over a neighborhood that was technically 2 miles south of my property. I wasn't part of Silver Pines. I didn't want to be. That was the whole reason I bought this cabin 10 years ago, quiet, isolated, sitting right on the shore of Lake Kepler with only one road in or out. That road, mine, and the lake, also mine, bought it with the land, deeded and everything. She flipped open a folder and tapped the corner dramatically. "We've received multiple complaints about the condition of your property. The woodpile is unsightly, your roof is a hazard, and your signage is non-compliant with Silver Pines aesthetic regulations." I blinked. "I don't live in Silver Pines." Cheryl didn't flinch. "That's where you're wrong. The HOA board held a vote last month to expand the association jurisdiction. Your property now falls within our boundaries." I stared at her for a second, trying to process the audacity. "You can't just vote to take over someone else's land." She ignored me and kept flipping pages. "We've issued a formal notice of violations. If you don't comply within 30 days, we'll begin eviction proceedings." I laughed, not a polite chuckle, the full, stunned kind. "Eviction from my own land?" She looked deadly serious. "If you refuse to comply with HOA standards, we'll have you removed." I crossed my arms. "You realize this whole lake is private right, and the only road that leads into Silver Pines crosses my land." Cheryl smiled like she was dealing with a child. "We've had it surveyed. The road is public easement." "No, it's not," I said, pulling out my phone. "I suggest you look up the parcel. Kepler Road, Plot 17, privately owned by Maddox Barnes. That's me. And the lake, same deal. Which means your entire HOA just crossed my property. Without permission." Her expression twitched for a split second. "You can't block access. That would be illegal." "You tried to evict me from my own cabin," I said, stepping closer. "Now I'm wondering how your HOA would function if I decided to shut the gate I installed 2 years ago. Or put up a nice big sign that says private access, no trespassing." She stiffened. "That would be considered hostile action against the community." I leaned in. "You declared war, Cheryl." "I'm just defending my property." She turned and stormed back to her SUV, heels clicking like gunshots on the gravel. I didn't say another word. I just grinned as I watched her drive back down the only road her little kingdom had left. This was going to be fun. HOA story, HOA stories, Homeowners Association stories, 3 days after Cheryl's unannounced visit. A heavy envelope showed up in my mailbox, hand delivered. No postage. Inside was a typed notice printed on HOA letterhead, threatening daily fines for non-compliance, and citing obscure clauses from a set of bylaws I'd never agreed to. The accompanying map was laughable. They'd drawn a crude red line that ballooned outward from their neighborhood to include my cabin, the lake, and even part of the forest behind me. I brought the envelope inside, set it on the kitchen table, and grabbed the worn black binder I kept in the cabinet above the fridge. It held every document tied to my property surveys, deed records, and the most important one, the access easement, officially registered with the county clerk. It clearly stated that Kepler Road from the highway to the lake was privately owned, maintained, and taxed by yours truly. There were no public rights granted, no shared maintenance, no conditional use. I dialed up an old friend, Dana Corbin, a land use attorney I'd known since high school. She picked up after the second ring. "Hey Maddox, what's going on?" "Got an HOA trying to annex my land." They say I'm under their authority now. Silence for a beat. They try this often, I asked. Not like this, Dana said. Usually they harass people inside their borders. This is new. Send me everything. I scanned and emailed the documents. She called back 20 minutes later. They don't have a legal leg to stand on. That expansion vote, totally meaningless unless it's approved by the county zoning board, and that takes months of paperwork and public hearings. I checked the zoning office's site. No such request has even been filed. So they're just bluffing. They're trying to make you flinch. I didn't flinch. I got out my bolt cutters. That afternoon, I drove a metal post into the ground at the northern bend of Kepler Road and attached a thick steel chain across it. A new sign hung from the middle. Private property. No HOA access without express written permission. The next morning, I installed a motion-activated camera in a pine tree overlooking the chain. I angled it toward the road and connected it to a solar battery pack. Anyone who tried to tamper with the gate would be recorded in crystal-clear detail. 2 days later, my camera picked up a black pickup truck rolling up to the barrier. Out stepped a man I didn't recognize, a broad-shouldered guy in a polo shirt with a clipboard tucked under his arm. He examined the chain for a moment, then took out a wrench and started unscrewing the post. I called the sheriff's department immediately. Someone's trespassing on private land and trying to remove a barrier, I said. He's not authorized. The dispatcher sounded bored until I gave them the parcel number. Then she perked up. Is this the Kepler Lake property? Yep. We've had complaints from that HOA before. I'll send a deputy out. While I waited, I walked down the trail with my phone in hand. By the time I reached the post, the guy had already removed the chain and was dragging it aside. You picked the wrong day for this, I said. He looked up, surprised. I was instructed by the HOA to clear this obstruction. It's impeding community access. Did they also instruct you to trespass? No, sir, but that's a no then. I showed him the deed on my phone. You're standing on privately owned land. That chain stays up unless you've got a court order, which you don't. The deputy pulled up just as the guy opened his mouth again. He froze when he saw the cruiser. The officer stepped out and asked for ID. Once the clipboard guy handed it over, the deputy turned to me. You got documentation backing your claim? I handed over the binder. The deputy flipped through a few pages, then looked at the clipboard guy. You're on private property without authorization. That's criminal trespass. You're lucky he didn't press charges. I didn't say anything. Just crossed my arms. The clipboard guy was told to leave and not come back. The deputy helped me reattach the chain before driving off. That night, as I reviewed the camera footage again, something caught my eye. A second vehicle had approached the roadblock shortly after the deputy left. This one was a gray sedan with a Silver Pines decal on the windshield. It didn't stop. It turned around. But it confirmed something I already suspected: the HOA wasn't done. The next week, I received a summons. Cheryl and the HOA had filed a civil complaint in county court, alleging that I was obstructing community access to shared recreational resources. Their claim: that Lake Kepler had historically been used by Silver Pines residents, and therefore they had an implied easement through my road. I showed the paperwork to Dana. They're insane, she said. Implied easements require decades of uninterrupted, obvious, and exclusive use, and even then it doesn't override written property rights. You've got surveillance, tax receipts, and a deed. They don't have a shot. We filed a motion to dismiss and countersued for harassment, legal fees, and damages due to attempted interference with private property. The court date was set for the following month. I spent the days leading up to it gathering statements from longtime locals. Several of them were retired fishermen who'd known the lake was private since the 70s. I even dug up a newspaper clipping from 1989 about the original sale of the land to the family I bought it from. The morning of the hearing, the courtroom was packed. I recognized half the Silver Pines board seated behind Cheryl, all looking smug. The judge, a stern woman with a reputation for hating frivolous lawsuits, flipped through the HOA's filing with a visible frown. "You're claiming a right to cross Mr. Barnes's land because your residents have used the lake recreationally." "Yes, Your Honor," Cheryl said confidently. "It's an established tradition. Do you have any proof of continuous, exclusive use over a 20-year period?" "Well, not documented, but several of our residents. Do you have a deed, an easement agreement, or county approval for jurisdiction over his parcel?" "No," but the judge raised a hand. "Then why are you wasting this court's time?" Cheryl's mouth opened, then closed. The judge turned to me. "Mr. Barnes, your motion to dismiss is granted. The countersuit will proceed. You may file a request for temporary injunction to prevent further interference." I nodded once. As we filed out, Cheryl didn't look at me. Neither did her board. But the real blow came 2 days later, when the county zoning board issued a public statement confirming that Silver Pines HOA had submitted no expansion request and had no authority over any property outside their original subdivision. The local paper picked up the story. The headline read, "Lake Cabin Owner Defeats HOA Land Grab." Within a week, 2 members of the Silver Pines board resigned. Cheryl, however, doubled down. That's when things got uglier. The first sign something was off came one morning when I went to check my mail and found the box ripped off its post, splintered wood scattered across the ditch. At first, I figured it was a drunk driver or a random act of vandalism, annoying but harmless. Then I spotted the tire tracks. Not just skids, deep ruts from a vehicle that had deliberately reversed and driven over the post again. Twice. I replaced the mailbox with a steel one bolted into concrete and added a second camera facing the road. That same night, a motion alert pinged my phone around 2 in the morning. I tapped into the live feed and watched a pair of figures standing at the edge of my property line, flashlights dancing across the trees. One of them pointed toward the lake. The other knelt down, doing something in the dirt. I hit record. By the time I walked out with a high-powered flashlight and a holstered sidearm, they were gone. But what they'd left behind was clear in the morning light: spray-painted arrows on the trees, bright orange markings on rocks, and small plastic flags stuck into the ground along the shoreline. "Survey flags," I called Dana again. "They're trying to fabricate a claim," she said. "If they can convince a court that they've surveyed the land and it shows public access points, it muddies the jurisdiction. It's shady, but not technically illegal unless they enter your property without permission." "They did." I emailed her the footage. She didn't reply immediately. 4 hours later, she showed up at my place in person, which she hadn't done in years. "I brought backup," she said, stepping out of her truck. A second vehicle pulled in behind her, county investigator decals on the doors. "Someone upstairs saw the footage," she said. "Turns out, your HOA's been playing games all over the county." The investigator introduced herself as Officer Laramie, a quiet woman with a clipboard but sharp eyes. She asked to see the flags, the markings, and the footage. Then she took soil samples from around the flagged areas and photographed the trees. "They're using municipal-grade survey equipment," she said. "That's not something a private citizen just buys on a whim." "What does that mean?" I asked. Laramie flipped her clipboard closed. "It means someone is either misusing city equipment or someone in their HOA has friends in county mapping. Either way, it's not legal. We'll find out." That night, Dana and I sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the lake. "They're not going to stop," I said. "No," she agreed. "Not until they're forced to." 2 days later, Laramie called. She traced the survey equipment to a contractor with ties to the HOA board, a former county employee who'd been fired months earlier for falsifying land use documents. He was under investigation for tampering with zoning maps in 3 separate neighborhoods. Apparently, Cheryl had hired him as a consultant. Then came the fire. It happened around 3 in the morning, and if my smoke alarms hadn't been hardwired to a generator, I might not have made it out in time. Flames were chewing through the edge of my woodshed. licking up the side of the cabin. I managed to put it out with the help of a fire extinguisher and a garden hose, but not before losing half my tools, a side wall, and the overhang I'd built last year. The fire marshal arrived by sunrise. He walked the perimeter, checked the soil, examined the debris. His conclusion was quick: arson. That afternoon, Laramie returned with 2 more officers and crime scene tape. The chain across the road was replaced with a reinforced steel gate, this time with a remote lock keyed to my phone and the sheriff's department. The county officially declared the road a restricted access route pending a criminal investigation. 3 days later, Cheryl was arrested, not for the arson, not yet, but for conspiracy to commit fraud and unlawful use of public resources. Turns out, she'd been funneling HOA funds into a slush account labeled Community Improvements. That account was paying the ex-county contractor, whose equipment had been obtained under a fraudulent maintenance request filed through a contact still working in the county department. At her arraignment, she looked smaller than I'd ever seen her. Gone was the blazer, the sunglasses, the clipped voice. She stood behind her attorney, who argued for leniency and claimed the charges were politically motivated. The judge denied bail. The rest of the HOA board fell apart within 72 hours. 2 members resigned immediately. One tried to claim ignorance, but was caught on a wiretap recorded by the contractor during a paranoid rant about reclaiming the lake before the elections. That recording was leaked. It made the local news. Then it hit state media. Suddenly, I wasn't just the guy who owned the lake anymore. I was the man whose property had exposed one of the most corrupt HOA boards in the county. The fire marshal's investigation took longer, but eventually they found traces of accelerant under the frame of my woodshed. Footprints led back to the tree line. It wasn't Cheryl. It was her nephew, board vice president, and the man who'd driven the black pickup during the chain incident. He'd been caught on a trail cam in a neighboring property the night of the fire, carrying a red gas can. He was arrested the following week. Arson, trespassing, attempted destruction of private property, and because of the proximity to my cabin, attempted endangerment of life. Dana and I attended the preliminary hearing together. The courtroom was packed again, but this time it wasn't just neighbors. Reporters lined the back wall. The HOA's attorney tried to argue diminished responsibility. The judge wasn't buying it. Outside, a news crew asked me for a statement. I looked straight into the camera and said, "This isn't about fences or paint colors. This was about control. They tried to take what wasn't theirs and they got burned." By the end of the month, the Silver Pines HOA was dissolved by court order. Residents voted to establish a community council, instead one, without enforcement power. Half their homes had already lost value due to the public scandal, and a class action lawsuit was forming from within the neighborhood itself, targeting former board members for mismanagement of funds and abuse of authority. The county installed permanent signage at the entrance to Kepler Road. Private road, no public access, protected by county injunction. The lake stayed quiet after that. No more flashlights in the trees, no more survey flags, just the sound of loons on the water and the wind in the pines. I rebuilt the woodshed with fireproof siding and installed a second solar battery for backup power to the cameras. I added another gate, this one down by the Lakeshore Trail, just in case. Dana came by one evening with a bottle of bourbon and a grin I hadn't seen since high school. "Not bad for a guy who just wanted to chop firewood," she said, raising her glass. I clinked mine against hers. "They thought they could rewrite the rules," I said. "Turns out I own the paper they were trying to write on." We sat there until the bottle was half gone and the stars were out, the lake calm and still like nothing had ever tried to take it, but I knew better. And now, so did everyone else. The snow came early that year, blanketing the pines in a silence that had nothing to do with peace. After the arrests, after the court orders, there was an eerie hush over the entire area, like the land itself was waiting to see what would crawl out of the wreckage of Silver Pines. I kept to my usual routine, fishing the lake, splitting logs, hiking the ridge trails, but I didn't let my guard down. Not with what was still unfolding behind the scenes. 2 weeks after Cheryl's arrest, Dana called me, her voice low and clipped. They're auditing the HOA's financials. County forensic accountants, someone tipped off the feds. I didn't ask who. She wouldn't have told me if she didn't want me to know. They find anything solid. Oh yeah, embezzlement, money laundering, wire fraud. Looks like Cheryl used HOA dues to bankroll a shell company, bought lake access permits, then flipped them with forged resale certificates to out-of-state investors. She was selling rights to your lake, rights she didn't own. That explained the sudden uptick in kayaks and pontoon boats last spring. Strangers showing up with laminated passes claiming they had lake access through the association. I'd turned most of them away without thought, assuming it was just HOA arrogance. But now it had a price tag attached. What kind of numbers are we talking? I asked. Somewhere north of $500,000, Dana said. And that's just what they've confirmed. I sat back in my chair, staring out at the lake. $500,000 of fake access rights sold on the back of a lie, and every buyer now holding a worthless pass with my cabin's shoreline on it. 2 days later, a federal agent named Curtis Lang knocked on my door. He was quiet, middle-aged, with a jaw like a cinder block and a parka that looked about 20 years old. "We'd like your cooperation," he said, stepping inside. "You're the legal owner of the lake, correct?" I handed him the deed. He didn't even flinch at the size of the binder, just flipped to the page with the parcel number and nodded. "We believe your property was used as the basis for a federal fraud scheme," he said. "We'll need your permission to seize and analyze the fabricated permits." "You have it," I said. "But I want every single one of those fake passes tracked. I want to know who bought them, who issued them, and who knew what." Lang's mouth twitched. Not a smile, something more clinical. "You're not the only one who wants answers." Over the next month, the investigation spiraled. Turns out Cheryl's scheme wasn't a solo endeavor. The former vice president, the same one arrested for the fire, had been laundering HOA funds through a landscaping company that didn't exist. Another board member had been collecting compliance fees in cash, pocketing them, and falsifying records to match. One of them even owned the now defunct printing company that had produced the fake lake passes. And the worst part: at least 20 families, some local, some from out of state, had bought property in Silver Pines believing they were purchasing lake access real estate. They'd been sold a dream that had never existed. The lawsuits came next. The county froze all remaining HOA assets. Federal prosecutors filed charges against 4 former board members. Cheryl faced a laundry list of indictments that read like the table of contents in a legal textbook: conspiracy, fraud, racketeering, mail fraud, and obstruction of justice. I was asked to testify. The courtroom was different this time. Bigger, federal, the kind with armed guards and microphones at every table. I wore a button-down shirt and boots polished for the first time in 10 years. Dana sat with me at the prosecution's table, her legal pad already half full before the first witness was called. When it was my turn, I spoke clearly. No anger, just facts. I explained how the lake and road were private. How no agreement, no recorded easement, no deed or lease had ever granted HOA access. I described the fake passes, the survey flags, the gate tampering. I gave them the footage, the signed affidavits, the tax records, everything. When the defense tried to imply I'd denied community access for personal gain, the judge raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Barnes, did you ever sell or lease access to Lake Kepler?" "No, Your Honor." "Not once. Did you ever receive compensation from the HOA or any of its board members?" "Never." "Then this line of questioning is irrelevant. Move on." The trial lasted 3 weeks. When the verdicts came down, Cheryl was sentenced to 11 years in federal prison. The vice president got 8. The others received 5 and 6, respectively. Restitution was ordered in the full amount of the fraud scheme, over $600,000, but money wouldn't fix what they'd broken. The Silver Pines neighborhood was a ghost town by spring. Nearly a third of the homes went up for sale. Another dozen sat empty, owners walking away from properties they'd bought under false promises. The new county council proposed repurposing the area as a conservation buffer zone. No association, no board. Just homes quietly nestled near a lake they could see but never touch, and me, I stayed. I rebuilt the damaged section of the cabin with reclaimed cedar from a mill upstate. Added a second dock, one with a bench facing east for sunrise coffee. The cameras stayed, but their footage was mostly deer and the occasional bear nosing around the compost bin. One afternoon, a woman in her 60s stopped by the gate. She didn't try to open it. Just stood there until I noticed her on the camera and came down. "You Maddox?" she asked. "That's me." She handed me a manila envelope. Inside, a copy of one of the fake lake passes, a closing document for a house in Silver Pines, and a handwritten note. "My husband and I bought here thinking we'd spend our retirement fishing. We had no idea what they were doing." "I'm sorry," I nodded once. "Thanks for the honesty," I said. "You staying?" She shook her head. "No point. We're moving closer to our daughter. Just wanted you to know, not all of us were in on it." She walked away without another word. That night, I burned the fake permit in the fire pit. Watched the edges curl and blacken, the ink sliding away like it had never mattered. Justice had come not with torches or shouting, but with records, cameras, and people who refused to be stepped on. They tried to evict me with paper lies and backdoor deals. But they forgot one thing. You can't evict someone from what they rightfully own, especially not when they own the lake and the only road in.